What's up, everybody? I am your host, a hairy witch that lives in the woods, and that is my co-host, a 1990s film student that can't read a map. And welcome to the Grindhouse Syndicate, where today we talk about a film that had a big impact on our lives, and probably many other people. The juggernaut of the found footage subgenre, The Blair Witch Project from 1999. So this movie, people either love it or they hate it.
Yeah, and I don't understand it. I guess if you're not a fan of found footage movies, I could see that. But if you do like found footage, man, I just don't see how you could hate it. It's one of those movies for me that I know it gets bonus points for being nostalgia and just that, remembering that time and what it was like. But I just can't see hating it. Like,
I understand, because I kind of thought about it. And in my opinion, I think that you really need to experience the amazing phenomenon that occurred when this movie came out. Like, with the whole viral campaign, the whole documentary, I feel like you kind of need it all to really like this movie. And if you don't really know anything about that, you were too young when that happened or you weren't born, and you watch this movie, especially seeing what found footage has become, not a lot happens in the movie compared to what, some found footage movies we see now, like a Cloverfield or something. It's, but for that time and what happened and everything that went with it, I think that you need to have experienced that.
I would argue that I wouldn't say that not a lot happened. I think the perfect amount happened in this movie to make it believable. And the way this movie was shot, it was really groundbreaking. So they did do this prior with Cannibal Holocaust, which is something a lot of people forget. It was done in a very similar way. But this movie benefited from the time that they did it. This was really the first movie to take full advantage of online marketing. And they were able to go and use the internet and push you remember, and I was real young, I remember it very well. This movie was built up so much before it came out. This being a true story, or the people wondering, like, is this real or is this fake? Even me being like a 5-year-old kid, I remember just thinking, like, oh my God, there's no, like, when the documentary came out and we watched it, the Curse of the Blair Witch. Oh my God, like this is insane that this is real. I even remember you telling me that the woods behind our house is where this took place at. Me being a 5-year-old kid,
terrible.
I could not, I had no way of knowing that's not true other than asking mom and her being like, oh, that's not true. But, as a kid, you're like, she's just telling me that to, make me not worry. And it was a good chunk of time of my childhood of us living there for probably a couple weeks, couple months, where every time I looked at those woods, I was looking for the Blair Witch.
I think it also really helps to know how they made it. Like, they really did put these people in the woods for days, and they fucked with them a lot, and they really did go hungry, and there's just a lot of real emotions that you see in this movie that if you know how it was made and a lot of those emotions are real emotions, I think that also makes the movie cooler. Like, you would like the movie more knowing how it was made and what you're seeing on screen. A lot of it is, a lot of that's true. A lot of people don't know they actually did get lost 3 fucking times during the filming of this. So, yeah, I mean, I can see people not liking it if they don't know everything that comes with it. They didn't really experience the experience of the movie when it first came out, and then they don't really know how it was made and the behind the scenes stuff. I could see it, but
yeah, well, I'll never be able to watch it from a perspective of somebody that doesn't know. Once you can't you can't put the lid back on that jar, knowing what you know. But even if I was somebody who didn't know any of that, I feel like I would feel the emotion of the acting, because I think the way they did it, like you said, a lot of the stress was real. Like, these people were really, having a really shitty time, and I think that comes out in their improv. I think this was as real as you could do a movie without actually putting them in
Yeah.
harm,
Yeah.
and I think you feel that, and I also think that they did the perfect amount of stuff in this movie to make it still believable for the campaign beforehand. I mean, I'm sure you will get into it a lot more, but they had an entire website built for this, missing like posters. Apparently IMDb, which I didn't even know existed back then, they had them listed as like deceased on their IMDb's.
Yeah.
Just they really were the first movie to fully take advantage of the internet in marketing a movie, to the point where everybody knew about this movie before it came out.
Yeah, as frightening as this movie is, for some terrible, stupid reason, we watch this the night before we go camping every time. And it kind of gets you excited for camping, but it kind of fucks with you a little bit. I don't know what that says about us as people, but yeah, we watch this right before we do our big camping mountains trip.
Yeah, I mean, we enjoy horror. We enjoy the unknown. The way we go camping is we like to go. We have a spot, miles and miles and miles away from civilization. One of our first trips, we literally parked our car on the side of the road, on the side of a dirt road,
Mhm.
just like they do in this movie, and just hiked in, not knowing what we were doing. And we like that aspect of being out there where, anything can
Anything can happen,
happen.
yeah.
And, I know that sounds weird for some people, but that is another thing that makes this movie feel so much more real. And it gives it such a awesome feeling, because where they're hiking, we always go in the wintertime, and it always has this same feel to it. Crossing logs to go over, running rivers and
Getting lost.
getting lost. Yes, we've been in that situation, and the stress behind that. But the biggest thing for me is when you're laying in your tent at night, and we've had multiple experiences with animals coming up on our camp, and they even have a conversation in this movie where Mike says, like, anybody crazy enough to follow us this far out is not something I want to mess with. And if it's not a person, that's even worse. And we've had that conversation. Like, if what we're hearing out there was a person, there's no way anybody would have gone through the shit they'd have to go through to get up here and to follow us. So if they did, they obviously had bad intentions. So this movie hits really close from home on a personal level, on the nostalgia side of things. It's definitely a special one for me, and I've been wanting to cover this one for a long time.
So we do like these are supposed to be Halloween themed movies, and when you originally brought the movie up to me, I'm like, Blair Witch isn't a Halloween movie. Turns out it is a Halloween movie. If you actually, I've never really paid attention to the scenes in the beginning in the town. It is Halloween
Yeah.
when they are doing this, so it counts as a Halloween movie.
Yeah, everything is decorated for Halloween. If you watch The Curse of the Blair Witch, a lot of the interviews they do, you get extended versions of that, the documentary side of it, the town's decorated for Halloween. And one thing I recently found out was the day that they got out of the woods was on Halloween. So they went through all this shit, and then they finally go to a diner to get some actual food, and it's like decorated Halloween. And they're like, holy shit, we've been doing this for like a week now.
With that being said, let's dive into the Blair Witch Project.
Hello, boys and ghouls. If you want to stay up to date on what's going on with the show, talk about or submit your movie requests, or just say die, then I got good news for you. You can always find us at one of our social media accounts or our official website, at Grindhouse.Horror.Pod.com, Facecrook at the Grindhouse Syndicate Horror Podcast, Instascam at GrindhouseSyndicate.Horror.Pod, and many gore, which you can always find links for in the show notes, as always. And you know what I always say, the morgue, the merrier. So please subscribe or follow for alerts on new episodes. Now, back to the show, kiddies. Frights, camera, action.
And if you really love us and don't want us to go missing in the woods and never seen again, give us a 5-star review.
Or like or comment. And shout out to those subscribers on YouTube. Yeah, we've been getting a lot of good movement. And as we discussed before, that is the only way to fight the algorithm.
Fight the YouTube man.
Stick it to the YouTube man.
All right, so The Blair Witch Project is a 1999 American supernatural horror film written, directed, and edited by Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez. It is a fictional story of 3 student filmmakers, Heather Donahue, Michael Williams, and Joshua Leonard, who hike into the Black Hills near Burkittsville, Maryland, in 1994 to film a documentary about a local myth known as the Blair Witch. The 3 disappear, but their equipment and footage are discovered a year later. The purportedly found footage is the movie the viewer sees. Myrick and Sanchez conceived of a fictional legend, the Blair Witch, in 1993. They developed a 35-page screenplay with the dialogue to be improvised. A casting call was an advertisement in a magazine was prepared by the directors. Donahue, Williams, and Leonard were then cast. The film entered production in October of 1997 with principal photography taking place in Maryland for 8 days. About 20 hours of footage was shot, and it was edited down to 82 minutes. Shot on an original budget of about $60,000, the film had a final cost of about $750,000 after post-production edits. I wonder how much of that was like the documentary and stuff.
Well, I know that the initial movie was shot on, what was it? Like
It was like 20.
25.
It was like about
something.
20,000 or something for the out in the woods scenes.
Yeah, and then I think it was after Sundance when Artisan Entertainment actually picked it up to do like a major theatrical release. I assume that's where a bunch of the money was added on. They actually did do reshoots. They shot like 3 separate endings, which they end up using none of them. But I would imagine a lot of that went to the marketing campaign. I mean, this is one of the best marketing campaigns that you're ever going to get. But I will say, so that documentary footage was actually already shot. That was done. So the original movie was supposed to be like 85% that documentary footage, and only 10 or 15% of it was supposed to be them in the woods. And the further they went on, and the further they kept getting this footage every night and going through it, and they would cut more and more of the documentary footage to the point where right before Sundance, there was only 3 minutes of the documentary footage in there. And they decided to scrap that completely. And that's when it really hit them. The movie isn't documentary footage. The movie is them out in the woods. That is the movie. And they actually got hit up by Artisan that said Sci-Fi had like an hour slot. Did they have anything for it? And they're like, fuck yeah, we have a lot. We have a whole movie.
So when the Blair Witch Project premiered at the Sundance Film Festival on January 23rd, 1999, its promotional marketing campaign listed the actors as either missing or deceased. Due to its successful Sundance run, Artisan Entertainment bought the film's distribution rights for $1.1 million. The film had a limited release on July 14th of the same year, before expanding to a wider release starting on July 30th. While the film received critical acclaim from critics, audience's reception was polarized. Principal photography began on October 23rd of 1997 with most of the filming being done on the Greenway Trail along Seneca Creek in Montgomery County, Maryland, with a few scenes being filmed in the historic town of Burkittsville. Some of the townspeople interviewed in the film were not actors, and some were planted actors unknown to the main cast. The actors were given clues as to their next location through messages hidden inside 35mm film cans left in milk crates they found with a GPS system. They were given individual instructions to help improvise the actions of the day. Teeth were obtained from a Maryland dentist for use as human remains in the film, influenced by producer Greg Hale's memories of his military training, in which enemy soldiers would hunt a trainee through wild terrain for 3 days. The director moved the characters a long way during the day, harassing them by night and depriving them of food. The final scenes were filmed at the historic Griggs House, a 150-year-old building located in the Patapsco Valley State Park near Granite, Maryland. Filming concluded on October 31st of 1993. So the marketing. The Blair Witch Project is thought to be the first widely released film marketed primarily by the internet. The film's official website launched in June, featuring fake police reports as well as newsreel-style interviews and fielding questions about the missing students. These augmented the film's found footage device to spark debates across the internet over whether the film was a real-life documentary or a work of fiction. The IMDb page also listed the actors as missing or presumed dead in the first year of the film's availability. The film's website contains materials of actors posing as police and investigators giving testimony about their casework, and shared childhood photos of the actors to add a sense of realism. By August of 1999, the website had received over 160 million hits. The backstory for the film is a legend fabricated by Sanchez and Myrick, which is detailed in The Curse of the Blair Witch, a mockumentary broadcast on the Sci-Fi Channel on July 12th of 1999. Sanchez and Myrick also maintain a website which adds further details to the legend. The legend described the killings and disappearance of some of the residents of Blair, Maryland from the 18th to the 20th century. Residents blamed these occurrences on the ghost of Ellie Kedward, a Blair resident accused of practicing witchcraft in 1785 and sentenced to death by exposure. The Curse of the Blair Witch presents the legend as real, complete with manufactured newspaper articles, newsreels, television news reports, and staged interviews. The Blair Witch Project grossed nearly $250 million worldwide, making it one of the most successful independent films of all time, as well as the 29th most profitable horror film, while also being considered a sleeper hit. The film launched a media franchise which includes 2 sequels, Book of Shadows and Blair Witch, novels, comic books, and video games. The film is credited with reviving the found footage technique that was later used by similarly successful horror films such as Paranormal Activity and Cloverfield.
Good stuff, man. That documentary, that's what we were talking about earlier. So I have the collector's edition artisan release DVD. I don't know when they released it, but it has the Curse of the Blair Witch on there, which is the documentary. And a lot of people don't know that was the movie. Like that, all that footage was supposed to be what the movie was. And literally the shit that they were getting on camera every night as they would leave the footage behind, they slowly realized, I think you mentioned it, it's like 20 hours, 22 hours of footage that ended up being filmed in the woods. And there kept being more and more stuff that they're like, we got to put this. And slowly but surely, they realized this is the fucking movie. And thank God for that. The Curse of the Blair Witch is really good. Like
It's an amazing
yeah,
documentary.
I watch it almost every time I watch the Blair Witch. I watch it after. It's a really good idea to actually watch it before.
Yeah, that's what I was
Um,
going to recommend. I would watch them together, and the documentary first and the movie second.
Yeah, I agree. I just always get too excited to jump into the movie and then I go back and watch it after. But it's such like anybody who watched documentary, especially like any type of like paranormal documentary,
Or like it's kind of similar to true crime documentaries.
yeah, true crime, paranormal, anything like that, documentaries in the late 90s or early 2000s, like the very early 2000s, it does such an amazing job. And, for younger people who haven't seen it, you couldn't just jump on the internet and Google these, and find out something's real or
Yeah.
fake. That was, the infancy of the internet that we have today. So, jumping on the internet, you end up on these websites and it just fuels it even more that it's real.
Yeah, honestly, the documentary, I wouldn't have guessed a single person in the documentary was not a real person. Like everyone in the documentary does a really good job, especially like the town historian, the like, the professor, there's like a college professor or something. Yeah, I mean them two, they kill it. The sheriff does a really good job. The private investigator does a really good job. Everybody nails their parts in the documentary.
Yeah, there's even family members, and it's like, I wonder if some of them were actual family members. They provided like family pictures of them growing up and stuff. They did it as absolute
Legit.
real as you could imagine. And that's what I mean when I say that it was the perfect time. It was the infancy of the internet. They were able to, grow the conspiracy that this was real. Instead of nowadays, you would be able to find that out pretty quick that it was just a movie, so they got it in that perfect time.
Yeah.
Anything before, like Cannibal Holocaust, it's harder to push it. Anything after now, you could find out the truth really quick, but it was just that special time.
All right, so ratings. Rotten Tomatoes, 86% is high up there.
That's
It's almost
good.
90%.
It's got that independent bump.
So IMDb gave it a 6.5 out of 10, Letterboxd a 3.3 out of 5, and the Google average audience rating is also a 3.3 out of 5. If you would like to watch this movie, you can currently find it streaming on Peacock and can be rented on Google Play, YouTube, Fandango, Apple, and Amazon for about $4. All right, so are you ready to dive into the plot of the Blair Witch Project?
Bro, I've been ready for this since before the show was a thing.
Oh, okay. You knew before that we were going to eventually go through the whole entire plot of the movie?
I did. I got lost in the
Wow.
woods once, and a old horse lady told me this.
So we start off with a very simple title card, just a black screen with a white text that says The Blair Witch Project. So we're immediately jumping into a very low budget documentary style. And next we see some different text pop up on the screen that says, in October 1994, 3 student filmmakers disappeared in the woods near Burkittsville, Maryland, while shooting a documentary. A year later, their footage was found. We then cut to some found footage where we meet our first main character, a young, ambitious film student named Heather Donahue. And we see that she is preparing to head to Burkittsville to begin filming her documentary on the Blair Witch. Soon after, we meet another one of our main characters, Josh Leonard, who is also a film student and a friend of Heather's that has agreed to help film the project. So Josh shows up with some equipment he borrowed, quotation marks. Pretty sure
Yeah.
he borrowed it without asking.
Borrowed it without the knowledge of the owner.
Yes. I believe it was from the university. And this is important because we see that he has brought along a 16 millimeter camera. Now, all of the footage that we are about to see is either filmed on this big ass 16 millimeter, which is all in black and white, and a standard mid-90s handheld camcorder, which is in color. So you can always tell, because they did color and no color, you can always tell kind of which person's perspective you're seeing, because Josh typically has the 16 millimeter.
Yeah, and what's really cool about that is a lot of the 16 millimeter black and white footage is the footage that was actually going to go into their
Yeah.
documentary. So
Yeah.
you can kind of see the difference between their documentary footage and the behind the scenes footage that most of the movie is.
So this is a documentary of a documentary.
It's a documentary of a failed making of a documentary that some people went missing in the middle of.
On like handwritten documentaries about people's experience with a witch.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting perspective to come up with that. You know, we have like, what is it, Ghost Watch? That is like it's more of a news story, but kind of that same, like, it's as if Ghost Watch was the footage that they found after while they were trying to film Ghost Watch and everything went bad. Like, it was a really interesting perspective.
So after playing around with some of the equipment, we see Josh and Heather leave for the trip, picking up our third and last main character, Mike Williams, who, he isn't a film student, I don't think. I think he's like going to school for something to do with sound or like broadcast or something, because he does sound stuff. But Heather doesn't actually know Mike. Mike and Josh are friends, and Josh has asked him to do the sound for this project, which he agrees. And with that, the three of them head off into their, like, it's only supposed to be like a 2-day trip to Maryland. So the plan for this trip is they will spend one day in the town of Burkittsville, where they'll interview some locals about the legend of the Blair Witch. And then the second day will primarily be spent actually roaming the woods where the witch has been sighted, and is the location of Coffin Rock and a small cemetery, with both of those locations coming up in Heather's research. So Heather then records an intro where we learn a little bit about the town. We find out that Burkittsville actually used to be named Blair, and there was an unusual amount of child deaths back in the 1940s. So we then see some of the footage of Heather interviewing some of the locals, and we don't really get like a whole story necessarily from one person here. We kind of jump around between a few people that have grown up in Burkittsville their whole life. And what we learned from this is that at one point in the town, children just started disappearing and nobody knows why. And this hermit named Rustin Parr that lived up on the hill, he came down one day and turned himself in for murdering 7 children. And what he would do is he would take the kids down into the basement. He would put one in the corner and he would murder the other one and then kill the one in the corner. And this becomes really important later on.
It does, and I do feel like there's a lot of people who have watched this movie, especially maybe once or twice, that doesn't really pick up on this in the beginning and the significance of it later on.
Yeah, so this scene here in particular, the story about Rustin Parr, is actually a reshoot that Artisan wanted, because they either wanted them, they originally wanted them to change the ending, and they were like, no, we don't want to change the ending. So they said, well, you need to go in and add something else that connects to the ending, makes it make more sense. So that's how the scene came about, this movie.
That's interesting. So I knew that they did some reshoots on the ending and they end up sticking with the original. Now, I don't think we have much information, or at least not that I've seen, on what those reshoots were. But I did see in a panel, Mike talked about one of the reshoots had him on essentially like a witchcraft crucifix, like those things that they find in the woods.
Yeah,
a giant one of those with him nailed to it in the basement.
Yeah.
I was like, damn. I completely stand by them keeping this ending. I think it's great because it ties in with the earlier part of the story. But man, I would love to see that footage.
I believe those are all on the Blu-ray. I think you can find all those on the Blu-ray. There's like 4 of them.
I gotta step it up and get the Blu-ray. I think when I bought this movie, Blu-ray may have not been out yet.
So there is another lady who tells Heather about two hunters who went into the woods and disappeared, which, by the way, this lady is a random person who actually lives in Burkittsville, and she made this whole story up on the spot. Yeah, they didn't ask her to. They kind of told her what was going on. She comes up with this whole story, and they liked it so much, they put it in the movie, and then they actually tried really, really hard to track this lady down to get her permission. Never could find her, and they just said, "Fuck it," and they put it in.
Was this the lady with the kid?
Yeah, with the
Yeah,
kid.
with the kid.
Yeah.
Yeah, she did a great job too
Yeah,
for
she just
having
made
a
that up.
kid. Like, yeah, I didn't know she came up with that off the top of her head.
Yeah.
She had like a kid like trying to talk over her in the middle of it, and it just everything about the beginning and this whole movie. But the biggest feeling from the start is everything feels so genuine.
Yeah. So then we get this old man. He mentions a local lady named Mary Brown, who is considered kind of crazy around town, but she apparently had an interaction with the witch and lived to tell about it. So Mary is willing to tell her story on camera. She is desperately clutching that Bible. That thing is not going anywhere. So she says that when she was a little girl, she was in the woods fishing. And while she was laying there watching her pole, she was approached by a woman who had like animal fur growing from her arms and hands, specifically horse fur, according to Mary. But the mysterious old lady in the woods then opened up her shawl and she revealed her body. And Mary says that she was actually completely covered in this horse fur.
Yeah, interesting thing with Mary Brown. Heather Donahue thought that she was a plant. And whenever they went to her house, she started like going through her stuff because she thought they had set this up as a set, like a set house.
Yeah.
And thought she was a plant. And they had to tell her, like in the middle of it, I think it was Mike, was like, hey, this is the actual lady who lives here. Like, quit going through her shit. And she was like, oh my, I felt so horrible. I was literally going through, I was like opening drawers and shit in this lady's house.
Yeah, I had never heard that
That's
story
why
before.
she was clutching that Bible.
So after this, we see the group kind of talking shit about Mary Brown, basically saying that she's like batshit crazy. We then see them hanging out and having some drinks and testing the equipment in a hotel room, preparing for the next day where they plan to head into the woods. So this is kind of like their last night of normalcy. So the next day, we see Heather and the gang interviewing two men fishing about the witch. One man doesn't really believe in it and basically chalks it up to local legend. The other man, who at first isn't really saying anything, then interrupts with a very old man thing to say. He says, "You damn fool kids will never learn." And I say to that, getting older sucks. But one of the silver linings is when I eventually get to say stuff like this.
You say whatever the fuck you want.
You can always just be, you damn kids, just out of nowhere.
This is the brother of the guy in Night and the Demons.
Yeah,
killed.
yeah. So these two men, despite their many disagreements on the story, attempt to tell the local legend of the Blair Witch. Supposedly, a young girl wandered off into the woods and got lost, and 3 days later, she suddenly appeared back on her grandmother's porch, rambling about an old lady in the woods whose feet never touched the ground. The older man then jumps in with his own story, where he says that about 100 yards away from where they are fishing, he's seen a white misty thing that he has no ability to explain come out of the water. The man then says that anybody worth their salt around here knows this area of the woods has been haunted by the witch for years.
That's why we go fishing out here.
I guess.
I'm gonna lie. What he described definitely does kind of sound like fog coming off the water.
A little bit. Totally could have been fog.
It's like it came out of the water and disappeared up the hill.
So after the interview, we then see the group parking the car on the side of the road, deep back in the Burkittsville woods. They get their bags full of camera equipment and camping gear and cheerfully head off into the woods. Every time I see this scene, it gives me the warm and fuzzy feeling because of how many times we have done this exact thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like down to the T of the times we've had to park on the side of the road. Even where we go as of recent, it's a long dirt road in the middle of nowhere. And just seeing that walk as she films the car as she's walking away. And you always know, like, this is the last time we're going to see the car for days. And, once you hit those woods, it's on. And I agree. I get those warm and fuzzies.
So, you remember I said earlier that they got lost actually 3 times while filming this. The first time was right here. The moment they left the car, they immediately went the wrong fucking way.
We have been there too.
Yeah, it's just funny knowing that because now every time I see the scene where she's pointing the camera at the car as they're walking away, I'm like, you're going the wrong way already. You haven't even went the right way.
That's funny.
So we then see the group playfully hiking through the woods, where they eventually arrive at their first destination, a little area next to a stream called Coffin Rock. We then see Heather sit on the rock as she reads a passage from a book explaining what happened here. So what we learn here is, in 1825, a couple of men stumbled upon 5 other men who had been tied together, with each man's wrist and ankles tied to another man's wrist and ankles. They had been laid across Coffin Rock, and it was very obvious that the men had been brutally tortured while still alive. They were also in the deep stages of decomposition. Someone or something had ripped open their stomachs and pulled out their intestines, scattering them all over the area. There were also these unknown symbols that were carved into each of the man's faces. The men who found this grotesque scene said, "Fuck this, I'm out," as they rushed back to get the sheriff and inform him of what they had found. But once the search party arrived, they found only vultures at the scene, and the dead men's bodies had vanished. They also said that the area smelled very badly of decomposition, which will be important here in a minute. So, before we go any further, I want to give a little history lesson on the Blair Witch. Now, if you were lucky enough to be old enough to remember when this movie came out, you'll remember the awesome documentary that pretty much fooled us all into thinking this was real. And everything I'm about to tell you is from the documentary, The Curse of the Blair Witch. So, in 1734, the Blair Township was founded, which we find out later is Burkittsville. In 1785, a local woman named Ellie Kedward pricked the fingers of a couple local children. These children then went and told their parents, and they believed that this was early signs of witchcraft. Ellie was then tried and convicted of witchcraft and sentenced to death by exposure. So they then blindfolded her and took her way out into the woods, tied her to a tree, and left her there. Now, this is not only the middle of winter, but it was one of the coldest winters in Maryland's history. So this is really fucked up. So a year later, in the winter of 1786, children in Blair Township begun disappearing, starting with Ellie's accusers. By the end of winter, half the town's children had disappeared and were never seen again. So this freaks everybody out, believing Ellie had put a curse on the land, and everyone says fuck this and moves, and this leaves the town completely empty. 38 years later, the abandoned town is rediscovered and named Burkittsville. And in 1825, once the town gets some more people and some stuff up and running, the residents decide to have a big picnic celebration down by Tappy East Creek. But soon after, the creek was believed to be possessed by a demon because it had been polluted by a foul-smelling oil. Also, in 1825, a young girl named Aline Trackle was playing down by the creek, which at the time was only a few inches deep, when according to 12 witnesses, suddenly a hand and part of an arm was seen reaching out of the water and pulled young Eileen in. and she was never seen again. For a week after this event, the creek then turned oily again and had tons of stick figures floating in it. In 1886, a young girl who was out walking in the woods gets approached by an old lady whose feet never touch the ground. The lady then takes the young girl to a house in the woods and leaves her in the basement. The girl waited there for a few hours, but then snuck out of a window and headed back home. But little did she know that her parents had already reported her missing, and a search party had been sent out, and this search party is our Coffin Rock victims. Which is why it is weird that despite only heading out a few hours before, they were already found in a deep state of decomposition. So this makes it sound kind of like the witch has some time manipulation abilities. And last but not least, we have 1940. So we have this man, Rustin Parr, who had a house out in the woods. He arrived into town telling everyone he had finally finished. The police went to his house where they find the mutilated bodies of 7 children who had their intestines removed and symbols cut in their foreheads, just like our Coffin Rock victims. Rustin said that he did this because the ghost of an old woman told him to. Rustin was tried and convicted of the murders and sentenced to death. His home was burned down by the townspeople, and he was hanged 4 months later. So that is our history of the Blair Witch.
And all that stuff was originally supposed to be the movie.
Yeah.
Like that was the movie, and the footage that they end up catching, which is the movie that we get, was so good that they slowly had to eliminate more and more and more. And that's why they were so stoked whenever Artisan contacted them and said, hey, Sci-Fi's got an open hour slot. Do you guys have anything? And they're like, we have a whole entire fucking movie. Like, we can easily give you an hour.
Yeah, if you have not seen the documentary, watch it because I only gave you like a kind of a fraction of it. It's awesome though. Check it out.
It is good.
So now back to Heather, Josh, and Mike. So the next morning, we see that all 3 of them are sharing a tent, and when they all wake up, Josh starts explaining that he kept hearing noises in the woods last night. And what really freaks him out about this is that the noises weren't coming from one specific area. They were actually coming from different directions all around them. There is also a really short scene right after this where we see Josh and Heather looking at the map, and we find out that Heather kind of got them a little lost on the way to Coffin Rock. And this is really, in my opinion, the first very tiny crack in the group dynamics. Because Heather in her map reading skills becomes a really important thing in this story.
Yeah, well, and it begs the question too, was Heather's map reading skills not good, or are they just being manipulated?
I have wondered the same.
I definitely, we know that they were being manipulated because they literally, at some point in this movie, go the same direction for days and then end up in the same spot. So was this early on, were they already being manipulated?
Well,
And it kind of messing up their direction? We don't know, but we do know that Josh is most likely the first signs of the Blair Witch being on their trail, watching them. He heard in the tent the very first night.
Yeah, I don't know if they're like deep enough in or anything yet for the witch to necessarily, because I think one of the big issues with Heather and her map reading was the very first time they look at the map, Josh asked her like something and she says, well, yesterday we were off the map, like we weren't hiking on, but I know where we came in onto the map. And it's like, that's not a good start when you start in an area that's not even on your map and you assume you know where you're headed.
Well, yeah, that can mess everything up, but we also do know that Josh is already getting signs of the Blair Witch by that point. We don't know if maybe they were being manipulated to stay away from this area and she ended up getting back on track, or maybe she was in the wrong place and they were being manipulated to end up at Coffin Rock no matter what. So just interesting thought.
So basically, Josh and Mike are playfully forcing Heather to finally admit that she got them lost the day before, which she reluctantly agrees, but assures them that she now is confident and sure of where they are at and where they are going. So next we see a bunch of hiking footage where we're just kind of like repeatedly time skipping here throughout the day. And they're trying to get to this little abandoned cemetery, but it's kind of becoming obvious that the trip to the second location is taking longer than expected, with Josh and Mike starting to believe that Heather has gotten them lost again. Finally, at one point, the group stops. Josh gets the map from Heather in order to try to figure out where they are, and Mike kind of gets pissed and calls Heather out. And of course, she is denying even being lost in the first place. We don't really know exactly like how long this has been going on, but Heather does say that the cemetery is only like a 90-minute hike away from their previous campsite. But Mike, during his blow up, says that they have been hiking all day. So obviously, the 90-minute thing, way out of the window a long time ago.
Well, we do know in the canon too, the time dilation is a thing here. So, who knows? I do want to say that the footage of them, like that, like just the different footage we get of them hiking was beautiful. One of the things that they did cinematography wise, for one, this is all shot in natural light, which obviously makes it feel a lot more legit. But witch movies in natural light seem to always work out really well. Like The Witch was shot all in natural light. I don't know why, it just makes it creepier. But they did something really interesting with the cinematography. So they actually adjusted the shutter speed to where the camera stock would get less light. And what they did, it caused underexposed footage. So then they were able to correct this by developing the footage longer than normal. And it gave the footage a really, a lot more grainier of an image, but also a lot more contrast. And I don't know if you've ever seen it. You can look it up and see the comparisons of the original and then the higher contrast, grainier footage that we get in the movie. And it really it makes the blacks blacker and the shadows of the trees and the lights lighter, and it looks really fucking good.
Yeah, it's cool. So after things chill out a little bit and the group sits down with the map and tries to like figure it out, Heather assures that she knows where they're going this time, and the group then sets out again for this mythical cemetery. Half the movie is Heather either saying we are really close or I know where we're going. That's a lot of her dialogue. So we then jump forward and we see it is almost dark. The group is still hiking when suddenly they come across an area with small piles of rocks on the ground and in the trees. This is assumed to be the cemetery. So later on that night, the group is awoken from their slumber by creepy sounds in the woods. So they head out to investigate, where they don't find anything, but they do notice that these sounds are coming from all around them. The next morning, we see everyone up and beginning to break down the campsite, but unfortunately, it is raining pretty good, and we know from experience there is no worse thing than to be getting pissed on, soaking wet in the cold-ass woods.
Yeah, when we've been there quite a few times, and it's fucking awful.
Every time.
Especially when you're not prepared for it, so, you can't get a fire going or anything. It's fucking cold outside.
It's literally, you will go from having a fun trip to being fucking miserable in 30 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the one time that they left the woods during filming. They end up they found a house in the woods out there.
Yeah, they actually got lost.
Yeah.
They found a house.
Yeah, so Mike said he was the only one who didn't want to leave for the night. And I guess he got outvoted by Josh and Heather. They're like, it's raining really bad. They said they had like 4 inches of water in their tent. They actually found a house in the woods, and the couple let them stay there for the night. But they were instructed to not shower. So even though they were able to get out of the rain, they still had to be in their filth and
be gross.
Yeah. I will say, if I got to the cemetery, I'd be a little underwhelmed.
I'd be very underwhelmed.
You think cemetery, like old ass cemetery, you got it like built up in your head. and then you get here and it's just some rocks, I would be
It's like 7 piles of rocks.
I'd be like, damn.
Honestly, I would have argued about this even being the cemetery. I'm like, I don't think this is the cemetery you heard about. This is fucking, we're lucky we found this.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I that would have been a debate, and I wouldn't have been sold on either side. I'd have been like, this could be an old,
Pet cemetery?
Yeah, like an old cemetery. Obviously, the headstones, getting headstones out here would be difficult. So I mean,
Bodies out there would be difficult.
yeah, that's true. But rocks would be easy to pile on top of them after you did all that work. Yeah, I would be very underwhelmed.
But while this is going on, we see Heather asking Josh what he thinks the noises are that they keep hearing at night. And he responds that he thinks it's locals fucking with them. And Mike agrees. So the group then begins their hike back to the car. But we see that there is a little bit of tension in the group as we hear Heather explain to the camera that she's getting a bit of the cold shoulder from Josh and Mike. Mike then turns to her and says that he doesn't remember hiking through this area yesterday, and Heather responds that they didn't, that they are actually heading through a different area because they went in a curve the day before, which leads her to tell the two guys 2 more hours max, which is a continuous statement from her. This statement from Heather does not go over well with the guys. Josh, who was under the impression that they were heading in the direction they came, is pissed about this alternate route. She says, the area we went through yesterday was the most direct route to Coffin Rock, and now this different area is the most direct route back to the car. And I'm like, look, if you don't know the woods very well, these woods in particular, you should just backtrack your trip.
Yeah.
Like, this is not a super smart idea.
And I get what she's saying, especially, I mean, they've been there for 2 nights now, so they hiked pretty far. The whole second day was supposed to be a 90-minute hike from Coffin Rock, so they're a whole day behind at this point. It depends on what the map looked like. Like, if there was a direct road in the direction and we knew we were going south, and no matter what, we were going to hit that road that the car was on, and it cut a whole half of a day or a day out of it because they had to kind of do a triangle from Coffin Rock to where they're at now, that would make sense. But in their situation, it doesn't seem to be that way. And if you're going to go off of a map and a compass and think you're going to pop out of those woods right where your car is, if that road does not continue in that direction, you're probably going to end up fucking lost.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem with what she's trying to do is, 1, none of them are experienced in this, obviously. 2, they are lugging around not just their shit, but camera equipment as well, like batteries, film, cameras. And they're on a tight schedule. They've got to have this shit back. They're not technically even supposed to have this equipment. So, with all that going on, me personally, I'd say let's just make the same fucking trail. We can literally follow our footprints back to the car. That's what I would have done.
Yeah, with her, saying something's going to be a 90-minute walk and it taking us hours, I wouldn't be very confident in her ability to read a map. I would be at that point looking at the map myself, but I guess they both agree they have no idea what they're doing looking at the map. I will say, because this is obviously where things are cracking. Like you said, this day is where everything really starts falling apart. If I was Mike, I would be very annoyed at her videoing our arguments.
Yeah, I agree.
Because he gets frustrated and she's like, well, that's what we're doing. We're filming a documentary. We're all going to be laughing at this. And I would be like, this has nothing to fucking do with the documentary we are filming. Like, I am pissed off. Josh is pissed off. You are delusional. Get the fucking camera out of my face. Like, at least let me cool down before you put a camera in my face.
So she tries to assure Josh that she knows exactly where they're going, but Josh wants to check the map. So they do that, and she's like, oh, see, we're totally going the right direction. But Josh disagrees, and he believes that they are definitely lost in the middle of nowhere. So after some debate, we see it is now almost dark, and Heather says that they should go ahead and set up camp, which only adds fuel to the fire because Josh and Mike don't want to camp out again. They want to get back to the car. And after some bickering, we see that it is now completely dark. They still haven't set up camp, and Mike is freaking out because he is supposed to return the sound equipment, and Josh is supposed to return the camera and be at work in the morning. So, not a good situation. Like, even the best case scenario, if they found the car in the morning, they still have to drive all the way back. They're basically their time table here is fucked up.
Yeah, well, you're not going to get the shit back on time, and you're probably not going to make it to work. I think the right call is setting up camp. Trying to find
It is at this point.
Yeah, already being lost in the daylight. If you think you're going to find your way in the dark, we have been in that situation, actually, where we dropped off at the wrong point in the dark.
Hours, yeah.
Yes, it was literally an all-night thing to get back on track. You can't see shit in the woods in the dark other than, as far as your light can shine in front of you, which all trees look pretty similar. Yeah, I don't blame her here. I'd be like, we got to set up camp, get to bed so we can get up as soon as the daylight comes and try to get our way out of here.
So later on, they are once again awoken in the middle of the night by creepy noises coming from the woods all around them. The next morning, they wake up to find 3 small piles of rocks stacked around their camp. So Heather is trying to film this shit. And Josh is like, fuck that, let's go. And Heather responds by asking, don't you think it's strange? And she keeps filming the rocks. And Josh's reaction to this is 100% me here. He says, yeah, it's strange, but it doesn't really fucking matter. I just want to pack up and get back to the fucking car. That is the 100% response I would have. Like, look, it's weird. We'll talk about it on the ride home. Don't fucking care right now. We've got to leave.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, shoot it really quick and then get the fuck out of there. You can always still shot it, but considering what happened to them the night before and those scenes, so when they're in the tent at night and they're hearing all those sounds and shit, those are some of my favorite scenes of the movie because I know what it's like laying in a tent in the middle of nowhere in the dark and hearing stuff, and it really does fucking trip you out. Now, in their situation, they're hearing like knocking on all sides of them and shit. They even get out the tent, and I'm like, you never get out the tent with a light on. Like, now anything out there can see you perfectly. You can't see them. But yeah, considering what they went through, I would be like, we got to get the fuck out of here as soon as possible. But I love those parts of the movie. They're always, for some reason, they always have such a, no matter how many times I see the movie, they have a super unsettling feeling when they're out there in the dark hearing that shit.
So, despite Heather agreeing that they need to leave, she continues to film the rocks while Mike and Josh try to get her shit ready. We then cut to a scene where they are all packed up, but this time, Josh is holding the camera filming Heather as she looks at him very seriously and asks if he has the map. That is not at all what you want to hear when you're already lost. So he's like, no, I gave you the map yesterday. Heather says she can't find it and begins accusing Mike or Josh of playing a joke on her and hiding the map. And considering these two have the most to lose by not getting back on time, I personally would take their word for it that they didn't have the fucking map. So this sparks an argument, of course, and Heather is definitely getting blamed for not being responsible with the map, especially when they are lost. Heather gets pissed at this and says, fuck it, let's just go, and they'll just follow the creek. But it doesn't take long for this idea to fall apart. The group then stops and Josh proposes that they put all blame aside and realize that they are seriously lost and they need to work together to find a way out. And it is at this point where Heather makes a statement that in this day and time, it's very hard to get lost in America and even harder to stay lost. That's what she said.
Yeah.
I said, I would disagree.
He says, "We're doing a damn good job at being lost then."
Yeah, I heard a missing 411.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was a super ignorant statement. Like, you know, I get the internet wasn't around. Well, it was around. It definitely was around, but it wasn't as big as it
Unsolved
is.
Mysteries, I think, was around.
It wasn't as big as it is now, but I'm sure the statistics were available to see how many people go missing in America every year, especially national forests and shit. Like
Yeah.
this has got missing 411 written all over it.
Yeah.
That's why I love missing 411.
So Josh does say that their family will notice that they still aren't back and they haven't called. So somebody will be reporting them missing soon, which means a rescue team will eventually come looking for them. Also, they still have the compass, so they can at least follow that and continue in the same direction. We then see the group cross a small stream where Heather gets water in her shoe. The guys start laughing about this, and it really pisses Heather off. She then confronts them about it, where they try to explain that they're just laughing at the situation and they are tired and hungry and just want to get back. We then see Mike hysterically laughing while Josh and Heather argue. He then informs them that he kicked the map in the water the day before out of frustration from being lost. Now, Mike has lost it, and he's like laughing like crazy while he tells this, and Heather and Josh are like speechless at first. Once Mike reassures them that he's not fucking around, Josh and Heather freak out. Josh even kind of attacks him, and this blows up into a huge argument. So, after a while, the group starts hiking again, with all of them agreeing to follow the compass south. And sometime later in the day, they come across an area with tons of these stick figure symbols hanging all over the trees. And this is the famous symbol that we have come to know as the Blair Witch symbol.
Yeah, it would be so fucking creeped out if we found these lost in the middle of the woods.
I would go the opposite direction from that.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't like lose my shit moment, but this is definitely, okay, maybe something's going on here. This is super creepy. I do want to add, the map fight was fucking incredible. Like, as from an acting standpoint, and with a lot of people who maybe don't know the background of this movie, by this point, they had been out there for days. They had less and less food that would be left for them. So they're hungry. They are tired. They have been walking for days, and they're really fucking frustrated. And I think it really comes out in their acting in this scene. And I feel like you can really feel it.
Yeah, I think during that scene too, they've already been lost multiple times, like really, like actually lost, and they possibly did not know whether they're lost on purpose for the plot or they have fucked up again and got lost.
Yeah, the way this was done is the directors would give them points on the GPS of where your next campsite is. Well, this was very early handheld GPS too. Like the internet wasn't super, satellites, weren't super great. So I'm sure that did lead into them getting lost a couple times. Although they had handheld GPS, this was some of the earlier versions of it that we could get on a civilian level. And yeah, tempers definitely at their peak, and you can tell in this scene, like, this doesn't look like something that was acted out. This is something that three people are very frustrated and they're taking it out in their improv.
So shortly after finding this area, it gets dark and the group has to set up camp again. And just like clockwork, we see that they are woken up in the middle of the night by strange sounds coming from the forest. But this time, it's a little different. This time, we can hear what sounds like muffled talking between multiple people and even child laughter. This immediately puts the group on edge when suddenly their tent starts to violently shake, causing Josh, Heather, and Mike to take off running in the woods. Now, I do know that this was not planned, this tent shake. This was, I believe, the director ran up and shook the fuck out of the tent, and the actors had no fucking idea it was going to happen. And apparently, this scared the fuck out of them.
Well, they didn't like any of the times they've been making noises at night. They had no idea that any of that was going to take place.
Yeah,
And
they didn't tell them anything about this.
That's why their reactions are so good. I've seen them in panels talking about it. All they knew that, you know, they were where they were supposed to be, and they had little direction on, you know, what's going to happen for the day. At night, you know, of course they thought, well, this, you know, this is probably part of the movie, but what if it's not?
Yeah.
What if it's not? We are in the middle of the fucking woods. We've been out here for days. You know, if somebody was fucking with us or something was fucking with us, how would we know? How would we know better? This scene right here, the tent shaking scene, probably my favorite scene of the entire movie.
Wow.
I always put myself in their position when you start hearing the little kids laugh and
Oh, that
all
would
the
be
weird
terrifying.
noises, and it's terrifying. I don't know if there's anything that could make me leave my tent at that point, but one thing that does come to mind every time I see this is the Dilatov Pass incident,
Oh, yeah.
where in real life,
We have no
the
idea.
scientists literally left their tents, ran out in the middle of the snow, you know, most of them with no clothes on or very little clothes on, left all their stuff behind because something so crazy happened to them in the middle of the night. And for some reason, this part always brings that memory back.
Now, the camera we are seeing this footage on is the 16 millimeter, the black and white. And it is being held by Josh at this time, and he is running behind Heather. So as we are watching Heather like run through the woods, we see her suddenly get freaked out as she turns and shrieks, "What the fuck is that?" So she obviously seen something fucking scary, fucking crazy looking. And unfortunately, Josh was actually supposed to pan and look at what it was, but he did not. He was so scared, he was just running. So we actually don't get to see what they seen, but according to the filmmakers, this is what it was. So an unseen figure that Donahue is shouting about as she is running away from the tent is the film's art director, Ricardo Monero, who was wearing white long johns, white stockings, and white pantyhose pulled over his head.
That would be creepy to see in the middle of the night.
Yes, it would be.
And you really hear it in Heather's voice. Like when she screams, "What the fuck is that?" That's not like a controlled scream. That's like a holy shit, like a very visceral scream.
Well, they take off running, and he who is waiting there, they don't know he's there, then that runs next to them, like runs parallel with them. And the camera was supposed to pan, and you're supposed to catch a glimpse of this thing running next to them. But unfortunately, we didn't get that shot. So after that, we see the group huddled together in the pitch black dark woods, waiting till morning. Once the sun comes up, they return to the campsite only to find their shit scattered around. And it quickly becomes apparent that Josh's stuff in particular has been gone through and thrown everywhere. We actually just seen this exact scene in the ritual.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah. So as he begins picking his stuff up, he discovers a weird clear slime all over his items. Now, at this point, the group has these spurts of fighting and hating each other, even to the point where they physically fight at times. So it's obvious that the group is starting to crumble just from the fear and stress of the situation. So at this point, Josh has lost it. At one point, he even sits by himself, and according to Mike, he cries. It seems that on top of getting lost, the fact that only he has been singled out by whatever this is, and with the realization that everyone is out of cigarettes, has really pushed him over the edge.
Well, it's really interesting to note. So when they're in the cemetery, or what they think is the cemetery, Josh knocks the rock over at the cemetery.
Yeah.
So he's very adamant at this part of the movie. Why me? Like, why is it just my shit that's being fucked with? And I think that ties into why he was the marked one. I will say it's a really interesting dynamic here, and it wasn't planned by the directors, but Mike is the first to really lose his shit. Like, he goes
Yeah.
crazy first, and then by this point, he's the one he's coming out of that and he's going into let's be smart mode, while everybody else is just now hitting that
Crazy.
losing their fucking mind.
Yeah.
And Mike does a really good job at being the one to try to hold everything together. And I think that's what ultimately led to a decision we'll talk about in a minute.
So they eventually return to walking aimlessly through the woods, heading south according to the compass, when suddenly they arrive at a stream that can be crossed by walking over a log. When Mike calls out that it is the same log they already crossed earlier. So they have basically walked in a big circle, and as you would expect, this causes everyone to freak out. So later on, we see that the day has once again come to an end, forcing the gang to set up camp again. We are now on night 4 of what was supposed to be like a one-night trip. Not much happens on this night. We just get a little bit of footage of Heather repairing her pants and the group talking about food. But we then jump to the next morning where Heather and Mike have discovered that Josh is missing. At first, Mike isn't too concerned, thinking that Josh maybe went down to the river, and suggests that they go ahead and pack up camp, and by then, Josh should be back. So, Josh obviously didn't just take off on his own, though, because all of his shit is still there.
Yeah. So after the night before, that would be my moment where I'm like, okay, we are going to fucking jog in whatever direction we decide to go into, and we are going to run from fucking sun up to sundown. If we can't get out of these woods, we got to at least put as much distance in between whatever the fuck is doing this. Like, I would have been at that point after being ran out of the tent and hearing the kids and shit. That would have been my flight. Like, we can't fight. We don't know what we're fighting, which is literally we got to move and put as much ground between us as possible. So how disheartening would it have been to come across that log that you've already been?
Oh, it would be terrible.
Like, just this sickening feeling that you would get. I think Heather's, like, her breakdown at that moment too. I think it's a testament to how good she is at acting in this movie, because you don't realize that we get all this acting from her. We have yet to see much of her at all in this movie. Like, everything we're
she's
getting
behind the camera.
yeah, it's just her vocal acting, and I thought that was a really incredible moment. But yeah, I think they should have took off and ran as far as they fucking could after that last night. And now, not only do they have to worry about trying to get out of here and get back to a car, but now they've got a friend that's gone.
I would be making weapons, fucking spear or something, and I'd be like, okay, one person can sleep for a couple hours while 2 more watch, then we'll rotate, and 2 of us will always be awake at all times, even if we got to nap some in the day. This is getting worse and worse, and we're probably going to have to, kill this thing at some point. Like, this is going to get so bad that we're going to eventually have to fight this thing, whatever it is. That would be my mindset.
Yeah, agreed. So I would be moving as fast as you can while you had daylight, and then when we did have to set up, I'd be spending that whole night trying to carve
Fucking spears and shit.
whatever I can.
Make some booby traps.
Yeah, it would be full Home Alone in the woods at that point.
So they spend a big part of the day waiting around for Josh to return. He, of course, doesn't. So they eventually decide to hike towards east this time, considering the south didn't work out, you could say. We then cut to the end of the day where Heather and Mike are forced to set up camp again for night 5. We then jump to the middle of the night where Heather and Mike are awoken again by sounds in the woods, but this time it's the sounds of Josh screaming for help. And this would be fucking bone chilling. I would not sleep after this.
Well, what's really weird is they don't sleep. They talk about it, and she asks him, like, in the middle of the night, and he's like, how the fuck could I get any sleep? And they still find something outside of their tent the next morning, which you're about to go over. but how creepy would that, knowing you were awake and you still didn't hear this thing, man. And I get that that's their friend. There's not many people out there that I would take off into the dark hearing them. And I think Mike's really smart when he says if that was him, he would have heard us. Like, he would have heard us, and if that was really him, he would have heard our voices, or he would have said something back. Like, he's just screaming, and I know they talk about possibly going after him, going, rather, what do they do? I think I would have sat tight in that situation. I would have yelled and yelled and yelled, and I'm like, if he can't hear us and we can hear him, something's fucking with us.
Yeah. At this point, the next day, I would be like, let's just start a forest fire. Let's burn as much of this fucking place down, and somebody will eventually come to put the fire out. And, at least there's that. Like, I would be so desperate. Like, let's just burn this fucking place to the ground.
Yeah. Yeah. This is what I love about this movie too, is, you kind of put yourself in those situations and you think, what would I do? And they're not making stupid movie decisions. Like, the kick in the map end was stupid, but they're doing what anybody who gets lost camping in the woods would do. They're hiking. They're all getting together, figuring out the direction where the road is, using the compass, hiking just that direction, but yet they still end up in the same place. And that's terrifying.
So Heather and Mike get out of the tent and try to look for him. Mike yells at one point, "Josh, tell me where you are." I'm like, what the fuck is he gonna say? Like, I'm over by this tree. Like, there's no landmarks to point out.
I think he's just in panic, and he's just like wants to hear if Josh is gonna even respond to him.
So the next morning, Heather opens the tent to find a bundle of sticks held together by slivers of string, and it has been left for them in the camp. Heather then opens this bundle where she finds ripped up pieces of Josh's shirt, and inside one of those pieces of his shirt, she finds a bloody tooth. Do you think it was a good idea or a bad idea to not tell Mike about the tooth?
Bad idea. I would have told him, but then again, he's kind of back in his breakdown mode. I do want to point out, earlier I was talking about kind of how up until Josh went missing, Mike had really kind of been the one trying to hold the group together. So Mike was originally supposed to be the one who got taken out first.
Yeah.
And as they watched this footage, because they would leave the footage behind for the directors, and they would watch it overnight and decide what direction to give them the next day. And they realized that Mike, it made a lot more sense to the story for Mike and Heather to be left there. But also, apparently Heather and Josh just could not get along.
Yeah.
Like, they just were constantly at each other's throat. They'd been out here for days. Like, the movie was starting to get real to them. They just couldn't get along.
Yeah, I did see that they actually were able to manipulate the footage to make it seem like it was Heather and Mike fighting, but in reality, it was actually Heather and Josh that couldn't stop. And they said that one of the only times they had to actually step in from, because they would watch them from far away, they had to finally step in because there was a Josh and Heather fight that almost went a little too far. So they actually had to step in and stop it. But yeah, so when you hear the stories about how bad them two fought, but then you see the footage and find out that they were able to kind of manipulate the movie to make it seem like it was different. And I also did see that Josh, when he got pulled out, because he had no idea that this was going to happen, he was stoked because he had a Jane's Addiction concert that he wanted to go to.
He did. He
So
went
he
to it, too.
went to that.
Yeah. It's funny. He was stoked, but Mike, according to the panels I watched, he was stoked because he's like, I just got a bigger role in the movie. So Mike was the only one who was not like completely hating this. I'm sure he was in a shitty situation, but when he took this part and he found out they were going to be camping, he's an avid camping lover. So he was really stoked to get the part. The night where it rained, it was Heather and Josh that wanted to bail for the night, and it was him. He was apparently very pissed off, in his own words. He was pissed off. He didn't want to call it. He wanted to tough it out and stay out there. So when he got up and seen Josh was gone, he thought he was going to be making an exit first, and he was stoked. He's
Yeah,
like, I just got a bigger part in the movie.
We then see some short footage of them hiking again. They have pretty much lost it at this point. It seems that the hunger and fear have really taken a toll on their minds. Next, we cut to the most famous scene in the movie, what I like to call Heather's apology. So it's now nighttime, and Heather takes the handheld camera and goes off a little ways by herself, where we see her put the camera uncomfortably close to her face as she begins crying and apologizing to Mike, Josh's, and her own family. And this pretty much becomes her last goodbye, because at this point she believes that they aren't going to make it out of this alive. And she would be correct.
Yeah, so I think I've mentioned this to you before. So Mike had a scene just like this. He did his own cameo apologizing scene, and the director said it was amazing. It was really, really, really good. But unfortunately, it didn't make sense to have both of them in the movie, and Heather's apology story makes a lot more sense.
It's
Yeah.
it's
It is
kind
her
of her
fault.
fault,
Yeah,
yeah.
it is her fault. And although his was amazing and it said it killed them to take it out of the movie, it just didn't make sense to have them both doing apology scenes back to back. And so Heather's end up, that's the famous scene of the most famous snot in cinema history. And unfortunately, Mike's didn't get in there. Previous to this, when they find the teeth, Mike freaks out. He freaks out, and he said that it was what he still feels the best acting he ever did in his life. And he was devastated when it wasn't in the movie. And during the panel, they asked the director about it, and he's like, yeah, it was great. It was amazing, but it didn't make sense for Mike to hit that rock bottom, that climax of freaking out. We didn't need him there yet. We still needed him in the movie because we weren't going to take him out, obviously, at this point. So they end up taking that out too. So there's a lot of really good footage of Mike out there that we're missing.
I also seen that Heather had actually addressed why the camera is so close, and she said that because she spun the camera around, she didn't realize that she had pressed the zoom on it and zoomed in a lot further than it should have been, which is why we get that really, really close up shot.
Well, I mean, it worked out great because what I remember, even as a kid, this was the most famous scene of the entire movie.
So later on, once again, Heather and Mike are awoken by the sounds of Josh yelling for help, but this time it sounds to be a lot more closer than before. And of course, Heather and Mike jump at the chance to find Josh. So they begin walking through the woods following the sounds of Josh's voice when suddenly they arrive at an abandoned house. Now, this is the house we heard about in the beginning of the movie, the one where Rustin Parr killed those kids. And if you remember, I told you that the townspeople burnt it down.
Mm-hmm.
So here it is again.
Yep, here it is again. Would you have went out towards the voice? Would you have left the tent?
Oh man, with him sounding that close, possibly.
I thought about it really hard, and I would have. At this point,
I think I could have.
Under the guise of what else do we have to lose at this point? We're fucking starving. We've been out here for days. We're not getting anywhere. One of us is gonna go missing next. I would have been like, fuck it. What do we have to lose?
So they head inside, believing Josh to be in here, and we see that this place is fucked up. It is a very old house that has essentially been destroyed by the elements and lack of upkeep. We also see that Heather is recording on the 16 millimeter, and Mike has the handheld camcorder, and we're pretty much just kind of switching back and forth between both of their footage as they look for Josh in this house. So Mike then hears Josh yell again, and it definitely sounds like he is in the house. So Mike heads up the stairs thinking he might be up there, And while he is walking up, we see all of these kids' handprints along the wall with some symbols and stuff.
That's super creepy.
It
I
is really creepy.
loved the kid's handprint.
Yeah, the house actually was full of graffiti at the time, so they had to come in and actually paint it. And then they got some member of the crew's nephews and nieces to come in and do red handprints everywhere.
Yeah, I think they said this was an actual abandoned house out
Yeah.
where they were filming at, and they actually had to go in and other than the painting to cover up like the graffiti and stuff, they had to go in and like reinforce the steps and stuff.
Yeah.
So nobody fell through the steps and got hurt.
Yeah, the house is actually unfortunately tore down now.
Oh yeah, well it looked like it was about on its last leg in this movie.
Well, it was actually a historical house, and it was up for debate whether to give it that historical certification to keep it from getting tore down. And there was even after this movie, there was a big petition, and it saved the house for a year. But then the city went and quietly knocked it down, didn't tell anybody.
For the sake of the history of the movie, I wish they would have kept it, especially considering, where it was. I mean, this just happened to us, Night in the Demons.
Yeah.
Night of the Demons.
Grocery store there now.
Yep. I looked up as many real pictures of that house as I could find online. There's only a few of them, and it was an abandoned house for years, but yep, they knocked that shit down after filming too.
So once Mike and Heather arrive at the top floor, they then suddenly hear Josh again, but now it sounds like he is coming from the basement. Mike takes off running down there, leaving Heather upset and confused upstairs. We then see Mike's footage of him heading into the basement, and pretty much as soon as he makes it down there, something attacks him, knocking him down, and then we hear silence as the camera just records the ground. We then see Heather's 16mm footage of her heading down to the basement looking for Mike. I love how they use the camcorder audio for Heather's screaming.
Agreed.
Because the 16mm doesn't have sound, it just films. So as she is getting closer to the basement, her screaming for Mike, it gets louder and louder. And it almost tricks you because it almost sounds like there's another person screaming because you're watching her footage. But it's really the sound from the camcorder. And that was a really great idea.
I thought it added to the realism of it too.
Yeah, that's I was surprised they thought about that. That's I had never caught that until this watch. I never noticed that the sound was set up like that.
I can't remember if I know I've noticed the sound being weird because it almost throws you off every time you watch it of who are you watching film this? With Mike being knocked down and this is supposed to be Heather running through here and it sounds like she's getting closer and close. But yeah, I did notice it this time and I thought that was really, really, really awesome attention to detail, but it just made it feel real.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't this dubbed in audio over top that just, doesn't make any sense.
But once she finally makes her way down there, she comes across Mike, who is just standing silently in the corner facing the wall, which is very creepy. If you remember, this is how Rustin Parr would kill kids. Put one in the corner, kill the other one, then kill the one in the corner. She then repeatedly screams Mike's name, but he doesn't respond at all. When suddenly we hear a thud, Heather goes silent, and we see her camera fall to the ground. And that is the end of the Blair Witch Project.
Yeah, I loved the ending with having him in the corner. I've always wondered if Heather realized it right before she got knocked down. Because with him standing in the corner, she's the one about to get killed. And I always wondered if, in that split second, in her character, did she realize what was happening?
Yeah, I don't know. I know they shot multiple endings, and I've read about them. And I really don't know if I would rather one of those endings besides this one. I can see the issue if they wouldn't have put the Rustin Parr part in the story, how it would be like, eh. But with that being part of the story, it does make this ending cooler.
Yeah, it really, really ties it in. And I know that as they went on, they didn't know how they were going to end this movie. And they said, like, the art department guys would come in every single day and say, okay, what are we going to do for the ending? And I don't know yet. And then they'd come in. We got 3 days left. What are we going to do? And it got to the point where the art department said, hey, the deadline's up. Whatever you do for the ending, you have to write it. We don't have time to make anything for it. Like literally, we have to shoot the ending tomorrow. We don't have time to build anything for it. So I guess their hands were kind of tied there because they just waited so long. They didn't know what they were going to do, how they were going to end it. And I think them going back in and adding that footage like you were talking about really ties it in. And it makes me love the ending. I wouldn't love the ending that much if it wasn't for that and tying it back in to the early part of the movie. I will say that growing up when I was younger, my biggest and only gripe of this movie was that we don't see the Blair Witch.
I was about to ask about that.
Yeah, so when I was younger, I hated that we don't see her. But now that I'm older, I'm really happy that we don't see her.
Same.
Because the scariest thing is something that you leave up to the imagination. And in order to show her, you have to literally outdo what somebody's imagination would come up with. Like you have to have something so scary, it's going to be worth it. And I think just leaving it in your head is the best thing to do.
I think that it would have done something that we see with a lot of VHS movies, right? All the VHSs we have now is we have found footage, creepy shit happening. And then every now and then we'll have a VHS segment where, they'll have like a big ass alien on screen. And you can tell, like, this doesn't go with the found footage. Like, it does, but it throws the story off where it then becomes not realistic because of what you're looking at. And I feel like this is exactly what would have happened if they would have tried to create the witch, put the witch in the movie, where right now, as it stands, every single thing we see is extremely plausible. And then as soon as you bring a witch covered in horsehair that doesn't touch the ground, that goes out the window.
Yep.
This ending here is realistic. I mean, 100%. A guy standing in the corner, a girl gets tackled to the ground.
I agree.
That's legit. That can happen. We know what that looks like on camera. We've seen similar things on camera before. Yeah, I think it would have ripped you right out of reality of the movie as soon as you seen the witch.
And that's why I said earlier, I feel like they did the perfect amount because they didn't make things so crazy that it wasn't believable for people who were going to see this to, be like, this is obviously fake. They would have did something super extreme like show her or, have somebody levitating in a corner, anything like that. It would have been, we would have known instantly, okay, this is a movie. This wasn't real. So I feel like they did the perfect amount, and I feel like leaving it up to our imagination is scarier than really anything that they could have put on camera.
I think it also allowed them to do what they did really well, which was pretend that this was real. If you would have shown a woman floating,
that's what I'm saying. It would have ruined that.
People would have known immediately.
Yeah. It would have taken you out of that. It would have taken you back to reality, and you would have been like, okay, this isn't real. Like this was just a media thing.
So Heather Donahue's mother received sympathy cards from people who believed that her daughter was actually dead or missing. They did a good job.
Yep, that's how you know you're doing it right.
So the handheld video camera that was used by the actors was actually bought at Circuit City before they filmed. After filming, the producers actually returned the camera to Circuit City for a refund, and the 16mm camera that was used to shoot the black and white documentary footage was actually, after filming, sold on eBay following the production for $10,000.
God, I wonder if that's trackable. How much that would be worth now.
So imagine somebody out there, probably in their garage or attic, has the fucking Blair Witch camcorder that they bought from Circuit City. No fucking clue.
Yeah.
And it's just sitting there, and we'll never know.
Yeah, that one's definitely not trackable.
No.
And you talk about a tight budget when you have to return the camera to fucking Circuit City.
Yeah, so Miramax passed on the opportunity to acquire and distribute the movie. The decision was made by executive Jason Blum, who didn't think the movie would be a hit. Blum later became famous for producing another extremely profitable found footage horror film, Paranormal Activity.
Ah, yeah. That's funny. Are you gonna be like, oh, I don't think this is gonna be worth anything, and then see it and be like, well, I'm just gonna make my own found footage, which was extremely successful at the time, and it's a big thing of what I think got Jason Blum off the ground. When Paranormal Activity came out, it was massive.
Yeah, it's ironic that he turns down this what ended up being huge
I think it
movie,
makes you look like an asshole.
and then he literally
Yeah.
copies it.
Oh, he completely copied it.
Yeah.
Like that's lame.
So Heather and Mike were never told what to expect to find in the basement of the house at the end. Mike was instructed to run up and down the stairs yelling for Josh before running to the basement and to keep Heather as far behind him as possible. When Mike reached the basement, two production assistants dressed in black grabbed him and told him to stand in the corner. When Heather arrived, they also grabbed her and gently placed her 16mm camera on the floor while gesturing to her to stop screaming. However, due to sound issues, the scene had to be shot twice. Heather Donahue said that the first time they did it, she was so scared she was hyperventilating and had to be calmed down by the crew.
Yeah,
So it got real.
That's what I mean too. Like we we were both in the army. We went through training, and whenever you're going through like a really stressful situation, they're sending what they call op force your enemy in. After a week or two of that, and you're
No
sleep
sleep.
deprived and
Yeah.
hungry, you always know it's still training, but those lines start to get blurred. So
They do.
imagine being in their situation. They've been out here a week now. They're hungry. They're fucking tired. They don't know when this is going to end. And they're now running through a dark, abandoned house. And, somebody in all black jumps out and grabs you.
Yeah, I mean, even though you're running through this house and you know that you're filming this movie, I mean, there's still like some thoughts that would cross my mind is, what if this is the wrong abandoned house and we've come to a house where there's a fucking homeless people sleeping and they aren't happy we're here? What if we're running through the house and the fucking floor falls out from under me and I fucking fall and get fucked up? Like, there's a lot of things that can happen. Even though you're filming this movie, you're in the middle of nowhere in a house that's obviously falling down. I would still be scared.
And that's what I love about the way they shot this whole movie. And I take that same situation to, when they're in the tent at night and they're hearing these noises, they think, well, this may be part of the movie. It's probably part of the movie, but what if it's not? You put them in a controlled scenario, but it's not 100% controlled. These people are
No.
camping in the woods at night. You have no idea what's going to happen to them. Anything could happen. There could be people out there that did try to fuck with them. So I just love that they would literally go at night without telling them anything and make noises and fuck with them. And you can hear it in their voices that they do have a level of fear that is really there.
All right, so ratings and kill count. We have a total kills of 3. We have Josh, who was abducted by the witch, had teeth and hair pulled out, and eventually killed. We have Mike, who was put, I guess, under a spell and killed by the witch. Heather was slammed to the ground and killed by the witch. All of which we assume. We never actually see any of them killed. I didn't see any point in doing a favorite kill. Doesn't really seem to be anything
I didn't
there.
either.
So let's just move on to rating.
I did want to ask you before we jump into ratings. So this just hit me, and I feel like horror fans, especially fans of this movie, would totally do this. If you could pay and a company organized what they called like the Blair Witch experience, where you went into the woods like the cast, and you literally just followed to different campsites, and it would give you instructions, but they would come fuck with you at night, and it would all accumulate into this, some type of climax, and, whether it's a house or whatever storyline they come up with. But to go on a camping trip and be fucked with and not quite know, I would totally pay to do that.
Yeah, very interesting idea. I would definitely try it. I guess I would be like really down for if they were like, well, at any point you're done, save secret code word or something, then yeah, I would do it. I wouldn't want to be stuck out there with the possibility that something could go wrong. But yeah, I would do it.
Yeah, I
Sounds
would.
good.
I think that would be awesome to go into like a simulated witch fucking with you in the woods scenario.
All right, so film rating, and you're up first.
So with this movie, I've talked about it in the past. For a movie to get a perfect rating for me, not only does it have to be a perfect movie as far as the way I feel, but it also has to mean something to me. And this movie does. Like, it means something to me. I remember when this movie came out, it was a huge deal. I've always loved it. I think I've loved it more and more every time I watched it. So I gave it a 5.
I'm about to say, it sounds like you were creeping up on 5 territory.
I was, and I know that a ton of people out there are going to disagree with that, and that's okay. I always try to do my movies as close to judging it by the movie. Every now and then we get a movie that we know is not a 5, but we give it a 5 because it just means that much, or you just enjoy it that much. And this is that movie for me. I love found footage and I love witchcraft. And you put those two things together and they did it. I thought they executed it amazing. The way they shot it's groundbreaking. I mentioned earlier, Cannibal Holocaust had done this before, but this was amplified by the age of the internet. They were able to market it so well. I think they did like we talked about, the perfect amount of stuff to not overdo it, but not underdo it either, to where we could there was people who went to the theater and watched this and still thought it was real.
I was one of them.
Yeah.
We thought it was real, actually, until the actors appeared on like Good Morning America, which was weeks later. Yeah, I mean, it definitely fooled us.
Yeah, I mean, I thought this fucking bitch was in the woods behind her house as a kid.
Yeah.
Like, that was, I thought it was that fucking real. I thought the cinematography was great. I talked about earlier. So not only did they shoot it in all natural light to give it a real feel, but they also did that camera trick to, really to bring out the contrast in the footage and the graininess. Thought that looked great. The marketing was profound. Obviously, we talked about earlier, it's the first time that a movie really took full advantage of marketing of the internet. The whole documentary put out prior to the release to further the legend of this, that it was real, was just absolutely fucking genius. Overall, groundbreaking movie, perfect found footage that did something that I don't think could ever be done again because of the age of the internet we live in now. Combine that with witchcraft and you got a perfect vibe from me.
I would say when you account for the documentary, when you account for the website, which, by the way, if you want to see the original website, you can find it on the Wayback Machine. It's still there. So when you got the documentary, the website, you got how they filmed the movie, how they made it. If you add all that in together with the movie, it's a 5 movie. It's a 5-star movie for me. I think that it's genius, man. It was a really good. I mean, it was lucky strike with time, but it was also really smart, and we ended up getting this really awesome movie out of it. Like I said, I could see the people that don't care for it, especially like if they don't know all the stuff surrounding it. But I think it's fantastic. I think it's such a good movie. I'm probably a little biased because I've been out in the woods, I've gotten lost out in the woods, I've stayed out there for days. But man, I don't know, man. It hits just right, in my opinion.
Agreed. We had the same childhood growing up. We're in the same stuff. We've been in these camping trips together. We've heard stuff at night, been like, what the fuck is that? And you always have the unknown. And we do that because we get a thrill out of those things. So watching a movie that does it as real as it could possibly be done without, being these actors being in danger, I thought, it hits a certain nerve. And it's one of those movies where every time I watch it, I get more into it, I get more excited, but I also, every time I watch it, I'm like, God, I want to go camping. Like,
Yeah.
this makes me want to go camping tomorrow.
So that is our opinions and coverage of the Blair Witch Project. Once again, we thank you guys for listening. Next week, we will be covering Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. We're going to head over to the Patreon and talk a little bit more about the Blair Witch Project, because I believe you have some more interesting info that you didn't share here on this show. I'm going to tell you what I think the sequel should have been, a much better idea for the sequel. And please give us a follow or like if you enjoy the show. Check out the website, check out the socials. Tell a friend, a family member, or a horse fur covered witch who lives in the woods about the show. We hope to see you next time. You got any last words?
Taco.
Oh, the code word. Okay.